Hi, I'm Matt Reardon, and I'm filling in for Eric today, who's on a well-deserved vacation. I thought I'd start today. We're looking at the Storm Prediction Center reports from yesterday. That's just July 6th. Not a ton of activity yesterday, only 96 reports, but there was an interesting one. These reports come with notes, and there was a tornado report out of northern Colorado in Arapahoe County. I thought I'd just read this one here. A tornado threw a 1,400-pound disc 100 yards. I know that's hard to read on the comments there. But if true, I've kind of dug into this a little bit. That'd be a very impressive tornado damage report here. I've dug into this. Haven't found too much more detailed information. Hoping to get more out of this. If I do, I'll relay it to all of you. But nonetheless, that's a very strong tornado, if true. I don't know what a 1,400-pound disc is. I don't know if that's kind of like be a very heavy manhole cover, maybe some sort of like shelter cover or a significant farm implement. I don't know. That's nearly a half ton, but pretty impressive, if anything, through that 100 yards. We did see additional storm development here through southeastern Colorado, moving into Oklahoma overnight. I'll show you that thunderstorm development on the radar imagery here. Storms initiating on the Front Range of Colorado, responsible for those early tornado reports and that ridiculous one I just showed you. But these developed into some supercells overnight, which eventually then evolved even later in the night into this bow echo. And that's not an uncommon evolution in July for some of these late night storms. That's now weakening over parts of central Oklahoma, but presenting us there right at the end with that very signature bow echo-like evolution. If we just look at the last 24 hours of precipitation across the country, there's those storms here in southeastern Colorado, southern Kansas, parts of Oklahoma. We did see continuation, I should say, of that kind of daily kind of spotty shower and thunderstorm activity across parts of the southeast, even up into the mid-Atlantic, associated with the cold front that's come through here. Behind that, we have seen some additional development here in the northern plains, so Nebraska, South Dakota, and Wyoming overnight. A storm complex moving toward the east, weakening now this morning, but perhaps some additional rainfall getting into Iowa here. We'll keep an eye on that. We did also have kind of an interesting little tropical-like feature, not tropical storm strength or anything even close to that, but just some thunderstorm complexes kind of bubbling in the western Gulf of Mexico. I was kind of rooting for these to kind of maybe extend further up into parts of Louisiana and southeast Texas. This area getting into some, unfortunately, dry conditions here. If we jump over and look at the latest drought monitor map that was updated as of yesterday, see some drought now extending through parts of southeast Texas and Louisiana. Hoping to get some rainfall in here where soils have been drying out. An area we've also seen kind of slow, but now getting into maybe significant drought is parts of the Pacific Northwest. Now, this isn't the rainy time of year for them here in the summer, kind of July and August months, but nonetheless, they have been packing up some precipitation deficits now. And we're keeping an eye on there for drought development going forward because not a ton of rain, unfortunately, in the forecast there. We did walk back some of the drought classifications in the Midwest, of course, dealing with a severe drought situation across parts of Illinois, Iowa, eastern Nebraska, certainly Missouri, even extending beyond that, the I-states here. But some of the drought walked back. We've had quite a bit of rainfall into parts here. We had the derecho move through Illinois and some daily thunderstorm activity that I think will continue to walk back this drought as we go through these additional weekly updates. It will take more than a good week or two of rain to walk back all of this drought if we kind of got out the big eraser. But nonetheless, the crops are certainly responding to the added water and moisture. The crops are going to respond more quickly than these drought classification maps, so keep that in mind. If we jump over, this is looking at the water vapor satellite imagery this morning. I'll just tell you, this is a map I look at almost every single morning to get an idea of what is going on in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And that kind of sets us up for the forecast, not only today on Friday, but certainly getting it tomorrow into Saturday and Sunday. We'll get you out into Monday and Tuesday when Eric will talk to you next week. And I'll just kind of point you to some important features I'm watching here. If you look closely, we can kind of see flow coming around the Four Corners region, pushing into the central U.S. That's indicative of an upper level ridge here that's situated across Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. You can kind of see in some of these filaments here kind of the upper level clockwise rotation of that upper level ridge here. If you look toward the north, we see something of a trough coming out of Canada. If you kind of follow the streamlines here from these upper level clouds coming out of Alberta, you can kind of follow these toward the southeast, turning somewhere in Illinois back up toward the northeast. You can see this cloud field kind of streaming here out of the southwest toward the northeast here in the eastern U.S. That upper level trough, that big upper level trough kind of barreling out of Canada has been responsible for a lot of this cold weather, these cold mornings that have come in to the Corn Belt here. Now, in between that, we've seen a focus for thunderstorm activity in parts of Oklahoma, Colorado, of course, and then some of that spotty shower and thunderstorm activity across the southeast. If we look at the upper level height field here from the ECMWF, I'll make this valid here as a Friday morning. And sure enough, there's that upper level ridge over parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. We've been tracking these upper level ridges for ridge riding thunderstorm activity, it feels like the last 6 weeks or so. And so expecting more of that activity here today. Not surprised to see that complex moving through Oklahoma along that ridge riding axis. And then there's that big upper level trough responsible for keeping the temperatures down across the northern part of the U.S. here. Now, I'll take this forecast quickly through the next 3 days here. And I want to point you out a feature that's kind of caught my eye. This is through just Friday afternoon here. That ridge still really centered over Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, not moving much. But you notice this kind of what I'll call maybe a notch in the flow, maybe at the apex of this big upper level trough. This little kind of notch extending all the way through parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, getting up into Minnesota. That's what we call, as meteorologists, a short wave trough. And this big upper level trough is a long wave trough. It's a long wave. It's the size of the continent. But these short wave troughs are maybe the size of, western Iowa, not very big, but they're a huge focus for thunderstorm activity and weather. And meteorologists are going to track these, certainly in July when there's a lot of instability for thunderstorm development and potentially severe thunderstorm development. The ingredients warrant that. And if I take you over and look at the Storm Prediction Center outlook just for today, if we kind of follow that shortwave down along that ridge riding thunderstorm axis, we see kind of a similar area as of yesterday in a risk area here in the slight risk. So potentially storms developing along the Front Range of Colorado again today, extending more toward the east and southeast through parts of Oklahoma. More of a wind hail threat today, except just along the Front Range. You kind of always have this ever-present landspout tornado risk, it seems, this year. If we go ahead and look over, this is central Oklahoma as of this morning. There's that thunderstorm complex moving through there. This is expected to weaken, kind of moving into an area not conducive for maintenance for some of these bow echoes here. Some of the models now weakening this here this morning by even 10 a.m. So hopefully not seeing kind of a long track derecho type event. And if you even look just at those last few frames, we're starting to lose those higher reflectivity values, indicative of perhaps some imminent weakening there. Now, if I take you back to that kind of shortwave view I was showing you earlier, make this valid as a Friday afternoon. There's that kind of shortwave I was painting earlier. If I take this through Sunday, or through Saturday afternoon, I should say, that shortwave now extending more toward the east. Kind of, again, I'm looking for the apex of this upper level trough in the height field here, maybe extending more through Illinois, eastern Illinois, into parts of the mid-south. We still have this ridge here, so still expecting ridge riding thunderstorms to be coming around that, perhaps in this area off the Front Range here. But watching that shortwave here as it moves through parts of the central Corn Belt and the mid-south, and then into Sunday afternoon, it's a little easier to see now. You can see kind of, again, that notch here in the flow. And if we kind of draw a line through that, there's our shortwave where we would expect, where there's more instability down here in the southeast, a focus for thunderstorm activity potentially severe all the way out now into Sunday afternoon. Now the ridge, meanwhile, this whole kind of 72-hour forecast here has been shifting ever so slightly toward the west. We kind of started this video more centered here over New Mexico and West Texas, now centered more over Southern California, parts of Arizona, really kind of over the Four Corners region. That heat is going to be following that toward the west along with it. And we're expecting next week a potential heat wave moving to parts of Arizona and Southern California and New Mexico. We'll get into the specifics of that next week, but could see potentially some very high temperatures here. Now, as we get into the Saturday outlook, this is looking out into tomorrow, continuation of the ridge riding thunderstorm activity along that same axis we've been talking about. But as that shortwave, remember I showed you how it was extending through parts of eastern Illinois into the mid-south, expecting thunderstorm development more through this area along that shortwave, extending into the eastern Corn Belt overnight, associated with that feature. Again, they're small, they're hard to see, but they're important in terms of the forecast. The Storm Prediction Center is certainly following it as well. And then now getting out into Sunday afternoon, we can follow that feature I showed you into producing potentially severe weather here, all the way from the Mississippi Delta and eastern Arkansas up through Maryland. So a wide risk area here. It is not uncommon when you have such a wide kind of open instability axis or risk area like this to it increase in magnitude potentially closer to the event. So we'll be watching this closely as we get into Sunday afternoon for potentially more impactful severe weather in the Carolinas. Now, some thunderstorm activity returning to the high plains, kind of behind this cold front as instability is able to move back in. Higher temperatures, I think, are going to move into parts of the northern plains and the high plains here. And again, kind of along that ridge riding axis, expecting more thunderstorm development. I think this is going to be kind of ever present as long as that ridge is situated somewhere here over that Four Corners region. What does this all look like in the simulated radar reflectivity? This is from the 3-kilometer NAM here. I'll make this valid as this morning. There's that thunderstorm complex moving through Oklahoma. Notice how the NAM weakens that almost immediately getting into the forecast here this afternoon. Additional development potentially here in parts of eastern Nebraska. It looks rather strong here on this map, but not expecting too much significant severe weather up here. Storm Prediction Center not highlighting a big risk area up there. Where they are expecting some potential development of concern is along that same axis we just watched last night. You see thunderstorm complexes developing in that area all the way through parts of northern Oklahoma overnight now. If I take that back through Friday afternoon here, again, that kind of ever-present southeast spotty rain shower activity where we look back at the 24-hour map tomorrow morning, probably going to look pretty similar to what we saw today. Take this through Saturday afternoon. I'll make this valid here. We see some morning showers and storms moving through Illinois. Not expecting those to be too strong overnight. Perhaps some good rainfall coverage. Too early to say in some of these kind of convecting or thunderstorm allowing models what exactly that pattern will look like. But kind of the important thing to note here as we get into Saturday afternoon, now 6 p.m. on Saturday Central Time, we see kind of this area of focus for thunderstorm activities along a potential front here, and more severe as we move toward the southwest because we have more instability down here. So parts of the mid-south Arkansas, getting into parts of northern Mississippi, Tennessee, and then up through the eastern Corn Belt, a focus for thunderstorm activity. Again, along that little notch, that little shortwave we were tracking, moving around the upper level flow. If I take this through Saturday evening into Sunday morning, now Sunday afternoon, we see the development. Again, you can almost make out the shortwave that's coming along the Appalachian here, and expecting kind of right at the eve here. This forecast only goes out to 1 p.m. Sunday, so kind of right, kind of at the brink of the next severe weather event here, parts of the Carolinas. You can almost kind of see it getting set up here as we get some moisture return off the Atlantic here. So watching that area, keep an eye on that closely Sunday afternoon. Temperatures all the while will be warming up across kind of the desert southwest. So I'll take this forecast for the National Weather Service high temperatures out to Sunday. And anywhere you kind of see this gray color, the cheat sheet here, is that's where we're getting into 90 degrees Fahrenheit or above. The salmon colors where we get kind of into the ridiculous triple digits and going even beyond that in parts of the desert southwest. We're in July. This is a very warm time of year anyway. So you add a big, strong upper level ridge on top of that, and we can talk about some pretty ridiculous temperatures in parts of Arizona and Southern California, maybe even exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit in some of these hottest locations. Across the central part of the country, we're continuing that cooler weather. That's kind of orange color here, corresponding with highs in the upper 70s, maybe the lower 80s, across a very wide section of the grain belt and parts of the eastern U.S. here on Sunday afternoon. Some heat returning to the high plains here, associated with potentially some thunderstorm activity moving back in to the central and northern plains on Sunday. And as we get into Monday and Tuesday, unfortunately, I think I don't want to get too much into the specifics of the forecast here that many days out, but this area could potentially be seeing some I'll just say ridiculously warm temperatures and a bona fide heat wave across parts of the Central Valley of California, Arizona, Southern California, and even extending into parts of New Mexico and Texas as well. Blue is the wrong color to draw on the map for a heat wave. I want to quickly give you an update on the long-term forecast here. Eric will talk to you all on Monday and Tuesday, certainly. 10-day forecast still looking friendly from the European model as far as some of these more severe drought-stricken areas across the central Corn Belt, parts of Iowa, Missouri, certainly Illinois, Indiana, getting into Ohio, parts of eastern Nebraska. I mean, you name the I-state, we're looking at some pretty good precipitation values here over the 10-day forecast. Some areas of dryness here lingering in parts of North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Keeping an eye on that as that has kind of shifted a bit drier as the focus has shifted further toward the central Corn Belt and more with the soybean belt further toward the south. Still kind of keeping an eye on some areas here in southern Louisiana and the Pacific Northwest, some lingering dryness there, unfortunately, and some drought slowly developing in there. If we look to the week 2, this is the GFS ensemble forecast all the way out through really mid-July now. And we still see that axis setting up here across the Corn Belt for some increased precipitation. Hopefully some of this getting into Minnesota, Wisconsin, and northern Iowa, where some of these areas have dried out just a little bit. Unfortunately, though, again, those two areas I pointed out, not expecting big precipitation values here through the middle of the July. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center, quickly looking at their 6 to 10-day outlook, there's that cold temperatures really kind of overlapping the pollination window here. This is pretty convenient, I would say, in terms of timing. We get these cooler temperatures, keep that precipitation axis across the central Corn Belt. This is looking out through July 12th through the 16th, and then, of course, there's that heat building into parts of Arizona, New Mexico, even Southern California. Take this out to the 8 to 14-day outlook. This is from July 14th to the 20th. Storm Prediction Center has that kind of precipitation axis. I'll pull that back up, extending through parts more of the mid-south and then up through the northeast. Still seeing warmer temperatures here through the south. I think that would set us up potentially for some ridge-riding thunderstorms in this region here, getting out through mid-July. So not expecting a huge change there. Unfortunately, as we just saw in that GFS long-term forecast, still seeing some dry weather persisting in parts of southern Louisiana. Quickly here at the end of this minute, wanted to touch on the Eastern Pacific. We've seen some activity fire up here with the warmer ocean temperatures. Potential tropical storm Calvin, a 90% chance of development in the next 7 days here off the coast of Mexico. And then behind that would be potential tropical storm Dora, the next two names on the list, the C and the D. Now, these aren't expected to kind of directly impact the U.S. We very rarely see landfalling hurricanes on the west coast of the U.S. due to some cold water temperatures up in this area, but they can influence the jet stream or these upper level ridges. So we do keep an eye on these. If we jump over and look at the infrared satellite imagery in the eastern Pacific, you can see you can almost make it out here. There's this kind of counterclockwise spin in the thunderstorm activity here if you look very closely. So that's an area they've highlighted for development, 90% chance of development. If you just kind of see that spin there, it's a pretty good indication of something trying to spin up here, and potentially tropical storm Dora developing behind that. I'll show you this quickly. We keep an eye on these storms here. Again, the area of focus is here off the west coast of Mexico. They can actually influence the position of these upper level ridges. And we just talked about this upper level ridge, not only setting up our thunderstorm axes, but drawing in a potential heat wave into parts of the southwest. And as I take this forecast forward, this development of this hurricane here in the western Pacific actually starts to pull this ridge toward the west. These hurricanes released a tremendous amount of heat, or they exhaust heat in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And upper level ridges are really just hot air in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So they can actually kind of couple with one another. And you'll notice as it develops these hurricanes and extends them toward the west into more of the central Pacific, watch how that ridge follows and kind of mirrors that hurricane just to the south. Kind of neat to see how these things kind of interact with one another. And certainly anything affecting kind of the position or the strength of these upper level ridges could have downstream effects on our weather here all the way, thousands of miles away in the central U.S. So we keep an eye on those. And then honestly, they're neat, especially if they're out in the Pacific, not impacting Hawaii or any other land masses. We get some of this cool imagery to look at in terms of satellite imagery, some studies here. And it can be cool to see these powerful storms develop and not impact life or property, maybe just stir up the ocean water and inconvenience a few fish. Some of the warmer ocean waters in the eastern Pacific fueling that potential development here. But of course, if they get toward the northwest, I mentioned some of this cooler ocean water here. Not expecting significant landfall impacts to parts of the western U.S. as a result of that. If we look out into the Atlantic, kind of the other area of concern for the U.S. in terms of hurricanes, all is quiet on the eastern front. This is the area we kind of watch for potential development. Just some weak showers here moving into the Lesser Antilles. There's even this kind of Saharan air layer, or this dust plume. You can see that kind of beige, murky color coming off the west coast of Africa. And that's really just shutting down hurricane development. This dry, dusty air not conducive for thunderstorms or tropical development, and really not much else to speak of here in the Atlantic. So we have seen kind of a quiet shift here in July, but we are expecting an active season. Colorado State University just updated their tropical forecast for the Atlantic. We consider them certainly a reputable forecast here. They're predicting 18 named storms for this year, for 2023, in the Atlantic. Now, we typically only get 14 named storms being tropical storm strength or higher. That's what we're watching for this year. El Nino years, we typically expect suppressed tropical activity, but because of all that warm ocean water that Eric certainly covered in the Atlantic, expecting that to offset that in a big way, and potentially could be looking at an active season in the Atlantic. Now, the newsmakers are those major hurricanes, Category 3 strength or higher, certainly if they make landfall. And it only takes one. We don't need a particularly active hurricane season to cause big issues. But nonetheless, Colorado State going with 4 named storms for this year in 2023. Our average is typically, I said named storms, going with 4 major storms, average only 3. So keep an eye on this forecast here in the Atlantic for potentially impactful tropical activity. That being said, that's all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for this morning. Thank you for watching, and happy Friday.